Well, thank you for taking some time to watch this video. This video is put together as an attempt to talk a little bit more about the consultant's report. We've had a couple of weeks to read it, digest it. Several of you have replied to the last page, which asks you to kind of score it and then provide your comments. And rest assured that we are taking all of those comments. None of them have been lost. We're, in fact, putting them, no one put their names on this, which is good. So everything's anonymous. And so we're compiling all the scores. We're compiling all the comments, positive and negative, so that no one feels like their voice isn't being heard at any step along this process. But I wanted to take a few moments that I don't have on a Sunday morning to address the report and hopefully, if you're excited about this, kind of help your enthusiasm. And if you're not excited about this, to at least minimize your stress. There's a lot of, in looking at some of the comments and talking to many of you, sometimes there's a concern of powerlessness, that a lot of changes are going to happen that no one has any control over. And so I want to just go through the report and provide kind of a commentary on what's being said in this report, what's not being said in this report, and reassure you, especially where those areas are that can't move forward without not only leadership buy-in, but congregational buy-in. There's several things that, in order to get there structurally, especially, require us to make substantive changes to our bylaws, and those are only changeable by action of the congregation. So let's get kind of right into this report. The report was the result of not just the 4 days that they were here on site. It began in the fall, when we started to provide them with what ended up being several thousand pages of documents. It was everything from annual reports and session minutes to the history of Marion in general and demographic information. We were trying to give them as much information about us and our community as we could, so that they could do their homework, have this kind of theoretical knowledge of Marion and First Pres before they came on site. And they were here for 4 days. They met with several members. They met on Saturday with the deacons, the trustees, and the elders. They followed that with a meeting just for the session where they presented a draft report. They took that draft and edited it and then presented it to us Sunday after worship, and of course had a great sermon from Caitlin. And if you haven't had an opportunity, go back to the March 5th Facebook posting, and you can see that sermon and that worship service. So let's get into the report. I really want to focus on what they said, what they didn't say, and again, help equip us to live into this. I will kind of lay my cards on the table here. I'm very excited about this process. I know it's going to make us uncomfortable. I know it's going to stretch us, but I am convinced that we needed outside, but I was going to say an objective outside voice, but these folks aren't necessarily objective. They are folks from our own denomination that are committed to seeing us succeed. And so for that reason, I'm grateful for what they provided to us. And I think we can reach the goals that are provided here. And I'm more excited that the journey from here to there will really result in some unexpected gifts along the way. Want to begin by saying, the report begins with where we are. And so there's good news there. There's a lot of good things happening at First Pres. We couldn't get to this place, which is engaging in a significant endeavor, unless there was a certain level of stability and comfort already in place. Again, it's kind of that paradox of you can't begin a transformation process unless you are comfortable enough with where you are that you're willing to be made uncomfortable to get where you want to be, right? If you're unhealthy at the start, Well, now you got to deal with all this internal stuff before you can start looking externally. So if there's a gift here, it's important to understand that most of the prescriptions here, recommendations, are really designed to make us move outward, which, because it's not dealing with a lot of internal stuff, says that there's a lot of health here. So I really want you to understand that. We did have a couple people wondering about, are they saying there's something wrong with us? And it's not that at all. It's understanding that they're able to push us and really push us hard because there's already a degree of confidence and comfort where we are. But the dilemma, as I assume most of you are aware, the dilemma is we might be in a good space now, but we're not doing the things that we need to be doing in order to be vibrant 10, 15, 20, 100 more years from now. All of us know that we've been treading water. I mean, we've been gaining members every year that I've been here, but we've been losing members, mostly because of death. But we do have people moving away and transferring. But by and large, we're a stable church, and that's a good thing to say. We're stable. But in order to meet the needs and to be, I love to say this, we've been a part of Marion since its founding. As long as there's a Marion, Ohio, there better be a First Presbyterian in Marion, Ohio, because we've been here from the beginning. You can't really have a history of our community without the history of our congregation being a vital part of that process. So it really is not just about a building or being, the label of being Presbyterian. It's understanding that as this community has ebbed and flowed, as it's had its successes and it's had its challenges, we've always been here. When I came here 13 years ago, downtown was fairly desolate, is a good word description. And Michelle and I had dinner downtown last night, and just even that little walk from the church over to Amato's was fantastic, because you're just seeing all these buildings, and some of them are still, what used to be Crown Tower Coffee is now, I don't know what it's going to be, but someone's building in it. So it's a really wonderful thing to see. And so as we see downtown revitalized, boy, we need to make sure that we are part of that revitalization, and that we see ourselves and our health as a bellwether, that the spiritual, and I do think it's fair to say that we have a vested interest in putting ourselves in a position. I think as we become not just a church in Marion, but we see ourselves as an historic, and not just historic meaning always been here, but that we've always developed leaders for Marion, Ohio. As long as we've been here, as you look at the business community, the entrepreneurial community, you look at the education community, whatever it is, First Presbyterian has provided leadership to Marion. And so that's one of the visions I have, is that we continue that role, that spiritually we are not seen as kind of a part of the pack, but we're being seen in a kind of a front of the pack kind of way, as we take responsibility for the well-being of Marion, Ohio, and we're going to build on that. But that's really what has kind of underlay this process of saying we need to do the things, even if it makes us uncomfortable, to put us in a place where we're in a leadership position, spiritually speaking, in Marion, Ohio, so that we are here to provide Christian influence into our community. And boy, now more than ever, we need to have, churches, including ours, providing that kind of spiritual vibrancy that the community needs. So I've got the report, and hopefully you've had a copy. If you don't, you can reach out to the church or to me, and we'll make sure we get one to you. So the report is pretty brief. It's only about 5 pages. Started off with listing some strengths and weaknesses, and I will say that I know that it caught some people off guard, that the first concern was that we're more internally oriented than externally. That's my reinterpretation of it, and I hope that helps, by the way. When you hear that there's minimum passion for God's kingdom, some people were triggered by that, and you kind of dug in and said, no, we care about Jesus, and yes, we do. But what they're responding to is they talk to members and they talk to engaged with leadership, and they just got a feel for the church is we're very internally oriented. We are not really talking in terms of a passion for people who don't have any faith at all or minimal faith, and doing what is necessary to engage, reach, and redirect them. And whether it's to First Pres or somewhere else, the idea is developing a heart for the broken and the messy, and believing that the gospel of Jesus Christ is the primary solution to the broken and messiness of lives. So don't take it too personally. Many, I think it's 40% is what Dana Allen said of Presbyterian churches within ECO, have struggled with the same thing we do. We're focused on ourselves, our needs, our wants. Even the desire to grow is really an internal kind of thing, which is, oh, we want to be here. And that's why I really want to challenge that. Why are we growing? Are we growing to have a full congregation? That'd be nice, but that's not why we're doing it, right? It's not ought to be the prime reason. The prime motivation that ought to lead us to grow is that we are committed to making sure that people hear about how Jesus changes lives. And it does begin with us. We'll get there, but it does begin with us talking comfortably about how God is at work in our lives. And not by accident, by the way, do I ask you during the offertory to take that moment to reflect on the way in which God has been blessing you. It is evangelical in its orientation. The idea being that as we are attentive to God blessing us, we're aware that God is working in our lives every day. And so that allows us to begin to think of narrative. What is the story? Maybe we can tell the story of Christmas. We can tell the story of resurrection. But can you tell the story of God with you? That's kind of the where that story becomes personal. It's where it becomes less history, and there is history to Christianity, but that history becomes a vibrant, living gospel story, because this is how God has acted, and then as I reflect on God working in my life, it's how God is acting. So we want to be more attentive to that. So, obviously the strengths are things I think that most of you are aware of. We have a beautiful building. We have rich, abundant resources financially to take care of the building and to do ministry. We have a loyal congregation. And one of the things that surprised them was just how vibrant our deacons were. They said a few times that typically one of their first recommendations is to eliminate deacon boards, because in most churches, they're really only doing ushering functions. And in our particular case, while they do that, they're also vibrantly engaged both in the church and outside the church of doing real ministry every week. And so not only did they not see the need to eliminate, they saw the need to not even tweak it. They said, look at this board right here. Your deacons are so good and vibrant and healthy. We want them to keep doing what they're doing. So, again, what we're seeing here is the concerns is being more gospel oriented, and it doesn't mean that we don't care about Jesus. It's caring that other people care about Jesus. It's having that desire in some way to draw someone that has no or little or or they've walked away from faith, and we're engaging them in a way that's attractive and intriguing to them, to draw them out of where they are to where God would want them to be. They also talk about, and we'll see under what they call prescriptions. I know most of us are more comfortable with recommendation. Is that we need to have a better process of identifying guests and thinking clearly about what are we doing when someone comes to our church for the first time? How are we really, in some sense, how are we preparing for a visitor to become a member? And there's an intentionality, and that's really what it's talking about here, is there's an intentionality that we're lacking. And a lot of you have pointed out when we added, 7 new members last month. We're adding 4 confirmands and 3 new members tonight. And so we've got these people coming in, but a few weeks ago we did a new member recognition, and we kind of blew it. We didn't have name tags for the new members, and so when the reception happened, people didn't know really who to identify, and they weren't really held out. So that's part of that process of taking care of guests, is that whole process of from the first visit to they're joined the church and they're now members. Because if we're going to keep a new member and we're going to make them a vibrant new member, we have to engage with them. They have to be meeting new people, and we have to be willing to make new friends. It doesn't mean we make friends with every new person. There's personality quirks and differences and everything, but we need to be attentive to making sure they find one or two meaningful relationships. So that's what they're really talking about there. We'll get to more details about the structure. If there's any one part of the report that has strong resistance, it's organizational structure. But at least we can say at the outset that they're right, that we have a ton of committees. And one of the things that we just need to be honest about, there is friction that exists beneath the level. Everything functions relatively well, but there are still some unresolved underlying tensions that exist. And the obvious fact of that is some of the resistance to making those organizational changes. So we'll talk about that in a second. So let's talk in the second page here, where we start getting into what they call prescriptions. And look, I know I had many people say, can't they just call them recommendations? And they could, but they wanted to make clear that the consultation report is really about listening, adapting, and growing. It's so recommendations sometimes sound like options, and they really wanted to make sure that the session understood that we don't want to talk in terms of options. Cherry picking a report doesn't call an organization to confront the most difficult parts. And let me just take one quick step back and talk about the overall consultation process. This has been, we're probably in year three and a half. This began about 3 years ago when I started a 2-year pastor learning community with Dana. It was paid for, not by the church, but by our presbytery. I engaged with 8 other pastors and Dana about 4 times a year to talk about church transformation and leadership and all that kind of stuff. But as we look at this whole process and where we are and where we're headed, I think it's really important that I just want you to understand that we want, when you look at why would we hire a consultants to come in and present us this? Well, first, we wanted to bring the best in, and I would arguably say that we're not going to find anyone better suited to talk to First Presbyterian Church about transformation and growth and what works as opposed to what doesn't work than Dana Allen. He is, since 2012, when ECO was first envisioned, Dana was the leader. He is the executive director of our denomination. Again, keep in mind that ECO is not a higher, there's hierarchy to the denomination, but he's not a boss. He's not in charge. He doesn't have authority as we would want to think about it. He's not a bishop or someone that can come in and make changes. He is an expert, though, in disciple making. He's got a book that he's published on disciple making. And he's also, he's had 10 years, 11 years to become an expert on the churches within ECO. So and that's one of the reasons I recommended to the session that we engage in this consultation process, because I learned that Dana was now engaging in the church level stuff. They had other people doing these kind of weekend consultations, but they were not as well qualified for the task as Dana. So I'd like to think that I brought to First Presbyterian Church the best expert and a team that we could get to help us identify where we were and where we needed to go. The other thing I'd say is also this, is in engaging in a consultation process, it ought to make us uncomfortable. If they gave us a report and we just settled down and said, "Oh, look at everything's good and look at how easy it is to reach these," I would question whether our money was well spent, right? We wanted someone to come in and in a caring way. And that's why I want to I like the word objective, but I also want to just fill that concept of objectivity with, it's not entirely cold and neutral. These are folks that are us. Dana has a vested interest in our success because we're a reflection of ECO, of the denomination. And trust me, most of the churches that are a part of ECO are exactly stories like us. Historic Presbyterian congregations that exited the PCUSA into this new venture. And so there is, a genuine partnership here. So I do want to just make that point of saying that, yes, this consultation report pushes us, but I like to think that that is good stewardship of your time, your treasure, your talent, that we're engaging in a process with people we can trust to really make substantive change in order to be a vibrant church for the next 200 years. And that's the goal. By the time the goals are reached in this 5-year plan, we will be at our 200th birthday. And what we can give no better gift to Marion or to ourselves than to be equipped to lead Marion spiritually for the next 200 years. As we look at the recommendations here, it is a 5-year goal, and it says here to see 100 people come to know Christ in the next 5 years, and to touch 5,000 unique individuals with the love of Christ. Now, that's something that we're fleshing out. Part of that is numbers are tough goals to set, especially as you're trying to track success or lack of success. It's one of those things that if after 5 years, if we see 25 people who didn't know Jesus now know Jesus, are we going to look at that as a failure? I would certainly say absolutely not. And same thing with the 5,000. Maybe we reach 10,000. Certainly when you look at the book gifts that we're giving to the elementary school, are we tangibly touching them? Well, some of them we are, because we're engaging with teachers and librarians and having conversations about balancing as a church, finding a way to partner with the school system in a way that respects that kind of their. It's not constitutional, the separation of church and state, but most schools act as if it is there. We know we can't present books that say this is how you come to Jesus, but we can show our teachers, educators, administrative staff throughout the city schools that we care about the work that they're doing with our kids. School systems are getting beat up all across the country right now, and sometimes they deserve it. No, of course they do. But all institutions are flawed. We're Presbyterian. We believe every element of human society, just like every element of ourselves, is stained by sin. We should be expecting brokenness. So for us to have an opportunity to go into the public schools where they're welcoming us, celebrating us, and thanking us for caring, that's a tangible gift. It might not be that all the students are aware, but certainly the principals and librarian staff and teachers are aware, and they're seeing that here's a church in the midst of a lot of controversy over books that's specifically saying, we believe it's important for kids to read. We know with Ohio and the 3rd grade reading guarantee, it matters that they read. So we want to partner. But that's one of those things that when we look at, sometimes if you go 5,000, how are we going to reach them? Well, I asked that consultant team for clarification. What do you mean by tangibly touching people? 5,000. And the diaper ministry and the Christmas shopping and the book ministry, the book giving, all of these things are already moving us on the path toward that goal. And so the 5,000 is probably going to be a very easy goal to reach and one we can celebrate. The real challenge will be the 100, because we really have to have a long conversation about evangelism. I had one person, and not just one, a couple of people saying, well, what does that mean? We're going to be knocking on doors? Someone said, what are we going to be, Jehovah's Witnesses, interrupting someone's Saturday or Sunday saying, hi, Hi, stranger. Can I disrupt your television programming to tell you about Jesus? We're not envisioning that. We're going to have a conversation within the church with all of us about what does evangelism look like. That's, first of all, evangelism. We're telling people about Jesus. What does it look like in a specifically Presbyterian context? We have a very different understanding of salvation than merely making a decision for Jesus or praying some kind of sinner's prayer. Decisions we can, as people of faith, we can make good decisions and bad decisions even when we come to faith. So we want to look at evangelism as really, when you look at the New Testament, what it really was, and that's disciple making. The Great Commission didn't say, go and get people to pray. It said, go and make disciples. And that's a process. But essentially, it can be distilled down to an act. And what is that act? Well, that act is to follow Jesus. It might be imperfectly, it might be, but the idea is that a certain loyal attachment to Jesus Christ. And then it fleshes itself out. So we're going to talk in more specific, measurable kind of ways about what evangelism means. But, we can safely say that it means telling someone or influencing someone. And that's, I think, the same thing, is that we often think evangelism has to be communicated with words, but a lot of times evangelism can just be at the right time, at the right place, and building relationships where people are aware of our faith and that they can come to us. Hey, I'm really struggling. Hey, I know you're willing to pray for me. Would you pray? I need faith. And that, it's not always, the idea that evangelism is always cold calling is a sad artifact of just what I would call poorly done evangelism, kind of this crusade-like conquer and conquest kind of mentality, where human beings were never really conquered, right? Or unless someone's really been victimized. I mean, the truth is that for us, life is messy. Life is about relationship and processes. And so that's really what we want to talk about, is someone redirecting. And that's really kind of the idea of repentance, even is it's not just kind of like, oops, I'm bad, I can't be bad anymore. It's redirecting and reorienting how we are living. The full concept of repentance is kind of transformative. And so we want to look at that, but we want to measure it. So be paying attention to that, because one of the things that we're going to be doing is we're not going to announce, hey, Saturday, we're going down Pearl Street to evangelize. No, we're going to start where it needs to, which is we're going to start Sunday by praying for our community. We pray for Marion regularly, but we're going to do this intentionally, and not just pray for, which we're going to continue to do, but pray for them, our neighbors, to know Jesus specifically. That is kind of the beginning process, is for us in our public worship and then in our private devotions to be lifting up and recognizing people around us who don't have faith. And you go, well, I don't know anyone that's like that. Well, I bet you do if you look at it and you discern. But also, when next time you're at the restaurant and you're being served, maybe your server isn't, there's, you're in the grocery store, or you're, and it can also be this, the other day I was in Kroger and a man started screaming at what apparently was his ex-partner, some relationship there, but just dropping F-bombs and the N-word and a lot of other kind of unpleasant things. Well, you know what? It's very easy, and it with me, it kind of launched that protective idea of just looking and making sure that guy was ultimately addressed by staff. You got to be careful about being a vigilante, right? But there's staff there, and that's what happened. Staff engaged and got him out of the building. But you do want to, at least for me, want to make sure that you don't just run away and leave someone to a potential violent encounter. But afterwards, it's like that guy will never see me, or there's a rare chance that will happen. I don't know if I'd recognize the woman. I was more focused on the guy. But there's an opportunity for me to pray for him, pray for his partner, ex-partner, pray for the baby that was involved. I don't know if they shared that baby or not. But certainly a lot of things to pray for. And if nothing else, those kinds of prayers are like, well, maybe I'll never have the opportunity to follow up. But I am retraining my mind and my heart to be thinking in terms of paying attention to the brokenness that exists in our community and not accepting it. Not just saying, oh, we've got brokenness and acknowledging it, but saying, you know what? These people need the healing of Jesus Christ. And that is transformative. Not just to them, but to us and to me. So, as we move through this, they want us to have a service of confession and repentance. First of all, we're Presbyterian. Confession and repentance ought to be second nature to who we are. Again, that idea of depravity, the concept that is always true, that everything that reflects the holiness of God is the direct action of the Holy Spirit, and everything that's not is us still trying to keep control of our process. There's not a moment from the moment of our conversion to the moment we die where we believe we are sinless. So confession and repentance ought to always be a part of our spiritual life. I'll recommend to you Dietrich Bonhoeffer's book, Life Together, where he put together a rogue seminary for a while. And part of that process was training young pastors, he was actually making them confess their sins to one another for accountability, and just remembering that great Reformed idea of what we call total depravity. It doesn't mean we're evil people, but it means every part of who we are is affected by this scandal of sin that goes all the way back to the garden. So it's part of being human. It's part of being you. It's that language in our prayer. For when we say, one of the classic Christian prayers of confession is, Lord, forgive me for the sins that I've done and for those that I've left undone. We can call them sins of commission and sins of omission. And it makes sense, right? There are things that we do that place us outside the love of the fellowship of God, that we actively do. There are choices we make to sin. But then there's other things that we do by not acting that also cause us to be in brokenness. And again, keep in mind, the Bible always considers the two together. Jesus was asked what the great commandment was, and he said two. Love God above all else, love your neighbor as yourself. You can't do the one without the other. You can't say you love God above all else if you're not loving your neighbor, because God is a relational God. He created everyone you see, and they're his. And we can't claim that we can be his without being engaged with the people he loves. And those are the saved and the unsaved alike. So again, keep in mind that we're going to have this in May. We'll have a regular Sunday service, and we're going to make it powerful, an opportunity to repent for anything that's personal, an opportunity to repent for what we've done and what we haven't done on a church level. And we're going to have that focus of saying, I'll go back to what I said before about there's never been Marian without First Pres. And there's been a long history where in every aspect of Marian, we provided leadership. And we ought to regain that kind of moral high ground. There's lots of wonderful churches in Marion, but there's only 3 that were here at the very beginning, and that's one of them was us. And so we ought to own that as a badge of honor and pride, and to say, you know what, that also comes with responsibility. We can be proud all day long. Nobody cares except for us. But if we take that mantle on ourselves of leadership, well, that fundamentally changes how we view our responsibility. That if there's any church engaged in leading people to Jesus Christ, we ought to be at the front of the line and not at the back of the line. Because, and again, I'm just going to make it, by the time we get done with this, I want to say we're going to be doing evangelism better than, because we're going to be starting from the ground up. No bad habits. The thing is, when you don't have any habits, you're in a much better position to create good habits at the very beginning. And we've learned a lot thanks to the evangelical church doing evangelism, but making a lot of mistakes along the way that have resulted in a lot of blowback, such as the knocking on doors, the cold calling, and that kind of relationship to churches and Christians. We're going to do evangelism in a way that is, to use an old word, winsome, where people are attracted and intrigued and curious and engaged rather than feeling like they're being, conquered. So we're going to start this Sunday with the third one, which is making prayer for the unchurched and community brokenness. We do a lot of community brokenness, but I am not. I'm the one that doing most of the praying on Sunday. I got to own that and say I need to lead us into praying specifically for people who do not know Jesus to come into an encounter with Jesus. So we're going to start doing that immediately. There's some other things here about session responsibilities, and it begins with, the session is, we think about session in our elders, but when you listen to their vows, their primary vow is to be the spiritual leadership of the church. So we're going to do that. We're going to make them start. It starts with us, and I'm part of session, right? Starts with us identifying people to pray for. It starts with us learning what we're talking about when we're talking about what does evangelism look like in the context of First Presbyterian Church. And so that will start with some reading. There's a book, there's some videos that we're going to start to watch, and that'll begin immediately. And then when we get into next year, I need to learn a lot. I'm probably like a lot of you. I don't cold call. I'm not comfortable walking up to strangers. I'm much more in my personal life. As a pastor, I've learned how to be outgoing, but in my personal life, I'm certainly more introverted. So for those of you nervous, I'm right there with you. Don't underestimate the fact that it's as uncomfortable for me as much as it is for you. But it's got to be done. It's got to be done not just because we want to grow, but because it's one of the things we're commanded to do by Jesus, make disciples. And I've been a pastor for 25 plus years, and I've discipled a lot of believers. I have to admit, I haven't seen folks go from unchurched to church regularly, and it's going to be uncomfortable. So I'm right there with you. The second part of the consultant's report is focusing on guests, intentional focus. We're working on that. I think we've got some of that in place with the communication card. So some of this is just organizing it better. Some of it is being more intentional on this. We're going to hopefully there's a conference we're going to be able to do online that's all about this kind of stuff. So we're going to get really good at welcoming guests. We're going to get really good at thinking, having a real plan in place of this one new conference that we're looking at. Really, is the theme is kindness. And we've got this really angry culture right now, not just in Marion, but, certainly across the United States. And so we can really do well for our community, for our families, and for our guests by learning to practice mindful kindness. So we're going to be pushing this pretty well. As far as the facility goes, there's some pushback here. They're talking about a redecorating phase, but I do want to say that some of this is building on the conversations they had with many members on Friday, and that is we've been talking for 5 years about the fact that we have a ton of mismatched furniture throughout the building. The Westminster room has an ottoman that's got one fabric pattern, 2 couches with a different pattern, and then it's got at least 3 different styles of chairs surrounding that room. And then when you go into the reception area, we have coffee and fellowship. We have the same kind of issue is that one, we need more. And the other one is that they don't match. That's just, we got a bunch of just furniture that we've collected over time. Almost looks like a youth room where you keep getting donated. So some of this is listening to what many of you have wanted for a while, which is a consistent and upgraded decor. Upgraded meaning that it's looking like it's that we're buying furniture for 2023 and not 1983, and that's really the concept there. And as far as the decor on the walls goes, I think that's also obvious. Is we have a lot of older things on there, not just older photographs, but older drawings, art, all that kind of stuff. And what they're really saying is, look, you're already doing ministry. You've got a diaper ministry, children's ministry, Bible study. You've got worship on Sundays, but you're not bringing attention to it. So when visitors come in, they see who you were. They don't see who you are. And I think even we would love to see that. It'd be nice to see what's going on now in our lives rather than what was going on then in our lives. And as far as what exists and what we're going to do to handle this is we're going to create different teams to handle both. We're going to have a team that's solely focused on honoring the history so that we get people that's their goal. I had a couple comments about saying, oh, they want to just get rid of our past. Absolutely not. That I wouldn't let it happen either. One of the things that I would just kind of throw out there is when you talk about honoring the past. Right now, we just have stuff on walls. What could we do with the Westminster Room? What could we do with some of our hallways if for example, we went and looked at the Harding Presidential Library? If you've been there, if they've got museum quality exhibits. Well, we certainly have the same kind of history here. How can we put the same level of detail and attention and professionalism into putting in the Westminster Room and in different places throughout the building? We have a lot of history, but it would be neat first, cataloging all of our historical artifacts and then saying, okay, what's going to be here on a rotating basis? What's going to be on a permanent, just like a museum thinks of saying, here's a permanent display, here's a temporary display, and then using some of the talent we have in our church to put the right graphics and art around those artifacts so that we've got museum quality displays. So rather than just having stuff in cabinets or stuff on walls, we're actually intentionally really honoring our history and doing something where guests will come in and they'll be drawn to the history of the church instead of just seeing it, all along throughout the building. I saw another church a while ago. They had taken a hallway and they used that hallway. They're a church not as old as us, but about at least 180 years old. But they took a hallway and did a graphic, kind of like a painting. Only it was designed more. So it was probably computer generated or something. But what it was a timeline from the birth of their community and their church and all these major steps in the history along the way. So I just want you guys to understand that as far as honoring the history goes, we have a lot of untapped potential here to do some extraordinary things while at the same time listening to what they say and bringing in what we're doing, having pictures being taken regularly and not just kind of putting them on Facebook, but, making smaller ones and larger ones and poster size. And just when people come in the building, whether they're coming in the tower entrance or they're coming in the back door, that the first thing they see is this is what we're doing, not this is what we've done. So I think that a lot of that, and then the cluttering, right? So they walked through the entire church, and I challenge you, if you don't think we need to declutter, take a tour, just walk through the building. We have got stuff, and we don't, these churches weren't built with storage. And I'm a big believer in keeping what you need. I'm also a big believer in getting rid of what you don't use and what has no value. We've got historical artifacts. We're not going to be pitching one of those. But we do have stuff that we don't need. And those things are going to be decluttered. A couple people commented on the pews, by the way, in the reception area. Those pews are safe. There's probably a lot of other pews in the building that are going to disappear because they're not being used. But we know that many of you like the pews. What we hear a lot about the pews is they're a little higher than the couches and the chairs. And so for certain people, it's a lot easier to sit down and stand up. when you use the pews. We understand that, and we believe in that, and we're not going to take them away. At most, we may just put a new pew pad in there, and I don't think anyone's going to complain, to match whatever decor we come up with. And that's not going to be a session decision. It's not going to be a pastor decision. We're going to involve all of you in that decorating, any of you that are interested in that process. The worship service, I got to admit there, when I read that, that was my trigger. I was like, well, wait a second. I spent a lot of time on that worship service. But in fairness, what they're simply asking here is not an overhaul. You won't come in and suddenly see that we're either like the Catholic Church or that we're like the Nazarenes. We're going to remain faithfully First Presbyterian, and with the liturgy that we're accustomed to. With in the time I've been here, we've made changes to the liturgy. We'll always evolve and adapt as it's wise and faithful to our heritage to do so. But what they're saying mostly is we need to look at our service of worship not only through the lens of us coming to church every Sunday, but especially someone coming to church for the first time. And I know that firsthand. I've seen people come in and see our bulletin and think, ooh, this is heavy, or ooh, this is Catholic, or they don't understand or can't follow along. Well, we need to do more as simply and as effectively as we can so that new people feel welcome from the very first moment. As soon as they open that bulletin, almost like they say, it looks like this bulletin was put together for me. So that's one of the things we're going to be doing. So on to, and I want to, hold this time as brief as I can. A lot of time, a lot of stuff to go through, but the most controversial is number 3, and that's structure that inhibits mission. What they want to do is see that we move to a new board. And I want to emphasize that that's the language here, is it's a new board. It may retain the title session, and it may retain the label, the offices of elder, but what they're saying to us is that as we are structured right now, we're very inefficient, we're very ineffective, and in some way, we're very not Presbyterian. In a Presbyterian church, as according to our polity, which is, basically our rules, is the highest ultimate governing body in any Presbyterian church is its session. Well, in our congregation, we don't have that. We have really a two-board structure, and in certain aspects of the life of the church, the session has no control. There are places in where the trustees have final authority over a decision-making process that happens for the congregation. They recognize that. I mean, some people got really upset that they even noticed, but they're Presbyterian. The first thing they look for is session in control over everything. And in our church, and again, I'm going to agree with those of you concerned. I've said for years that the trustees perform a fantastic function. But I agree with the report that we need to be fully Presbyterian in our governments. We're out of order right now. And it's something that we need to take upon ourselves as Presbyterians, not to worry about ECO consultants or the presbytery or anyone else. Is just say, hey, we spent a long time here understanding that we have always been and always want to be identified as Presbyterians. I always want to be identified as Presbyterians, and that's not merely theology, it's also in our board structure. So we've got to try to get to where they want us to be. And that's where I'm going to challenge all of us to look at our language. I've heard a few people say, well, we can't do that. We can't become one board. Well, we can. The fundamental question is, will we? So if you want to say we won't we won't create a new board, okay, we can have that conversation, because that's an interesting conversation, because now we can talk about what are the factors that say we just won't give up on this model. Can't is not a proper kind of concept here. We've got a lot of brilliant people at First Pres. We can do that. So all the concerns, and I know them. I mean, I've been here for 13 years. I know the concerns about making sure that the trustees building, and it's not the trustees' money, it's the church's money for the use of the building, but we want to make sure that that's what it's used for. I came in where where the session bequest was literally drained before I even had a chance to kind of put my thumb in the plug and plug up the leaky hole. So I have served almost all my ministry without having padding in the budget to do ministry. But I also know how much work this building requires. Everything from the brownstone that's on the external part of the building to the roof, to flooding, water in the building concerns, to new bathrooms, to everything that this church, to fixing stained glass. We are a blessed church where we don't have to come to you all every time there's a problem with the building. Thanks to gifts that have been given throughout the 200 years of our church, we have an ability to react to building issues without having to say, hey, yeah, we need, in addition to paying salaries and ministry and mission in the church, we also need, by the way, to redo 2 bathrooms, or we need to dig up the back part of the church to redo the drainage system and re-put. All those projects are done without having to go to the congregation, to you all at all. So I just want to try and make the case here that when it comes to the value of the trustees, I'm 100% on board. So what that means, though, is that we kind of unpack what our concerns are, what our worries are, what our fears of. There's a real fear that session and a rogue pastor could kind of raid church funds. It's happened. And so that, what I would say, though, is that concern can be addressed and we get the new board without saying just stubbornly, we can't. We can say we won't, and that's fine. We may get to that place. But that's the conversation, is to say all of those concerns, whether it's a session that's not, and this is the thing, is a session that doesn't feel comfortable pushing back against its pastor in the best interest of the well-being of the church, is a poorly trained session. So what do we have to do to assure ourselves that every year, every session member that comes on, those boards have good training, not just a pastor kind of bending ears or getting loyalty, and it starts with the nominating process. How do we make sure the nominating committee is putting the best people on the board, not the people the pastor wants? We've got some checks and balances already, but that's why I say is as we unpack this, we can absolutely create a new board. And I want to make that language very clear. It is the elimination of the current session and the way it functions and the way it acts, as well as the elimination of the board of trustees, not the function of the trustees. I certainly do not want a session where trustees have to go to the session every month and say, hey, we need to replace 14 ceiling tiles. Will you give us permission? No. We want our trustees to function like they do right now, which is if a bathroom needs fixing, they can go ahead and fix it. If ceiling tiles need to be replaced, they can go. They've got a budget and they can operate within that budget, and they can react in real time, not having to wait for some over micromanaging board hovering over them trying to say, oh, I don't know if we need these kind of tiles right now. No. We want to keep that we want to keep the functionality largely the way it is, but we want to make the overall system of the church healthy. And right now, there is, and if you know our structure, you will agree with me that there is an underlying tension that's really not been resolved as far as the necessity, the language of we need the trustees. Well, you don't need anything. We could become Baptist. I mean, we probably won't, but a Baptist structure is congregational. You can do whatever you want to. And so that's where we're really asking that question of, are we really Presbyterian? Because in a Presbyterian church, there's one governing body, it's the session. And so really, but what they're also trying to say here is it's not taking the session as we know it and saying, oh, you guys have been functioning really well, we just need to tweak things, or we need to merge, or we need to unify. We use that language because it's easy, people understand it, but it's really we're not talking about merging boards. We're not talking about unifying boards. We're talking about creating a brand new board structure that we haven't lived into ever. And so part of that is training. I need to know, the session needs to learn and by the way, whoever, as we're building this, a lot of it is what does Dana, who knows sessions very well, what is the best, what is a streamlined, efficient, effective session? What does it look like? So we're going to get there. And then the last thing I want to say about this, and this also goes to scholarship funds. People were nervous there. I will say personally that I know that came out of conversations with some of our church members, that we're talking about funds that we have that we're not using. And some of it is we don't know how restricted they are. But let me address the changing of the board structure to one board and any kind of use of church monies or scholarship funds, all this other stuff. The people that were here, Dana, Caitlin, and Robin, they're all very intelligent people. They're all Presbyterians. And so I just want to say the obvious. First of all, they know the law, and they know restricted funds. There are fiduciary responsibilities. No organization can raid a fund and use it for purposes to which it had not been intended. So when we're talking about scholarship funds, we've been engaged in a year and a half talking about where our scholarships are and how we can make better use. We've got some scholarships that we've never paid out since I've been here, and that's 13 years. Certainly the people that set up those scholarship funds want to give those gifts. So we're talking about not rating them or changing them. We're talking about the donor. We know one, for instance. We have a scholarship called the True Scholarship. And there are restrictions on that scholarship. The candidate is supposed to tour the True home. They're supposed to give an essay to the session about their experience in the True home. But there are other restrictions. One is a GPA restriction. And we found out that the GPA restriction wasn't a true restriction. It was something one session added at some point, and we just carried it forward. Now, when we had times where we had 6 candidates for one scholarship, putting a GPA restriction on it can help make an easier decision. It's hard to give, when we're talking about church kids, it's hard to decide this kid gets it and this one doesn't. So when you can have some objective ways of thinning those out, I understand why they put it in there. But that's what we're trying to look at. So understand this, that when Dana and Robin and Caitlin came up with that recommendation, they weren't asking us to break the law or to facilitate breaking the law. And so nothing will be used for any purpose that it's never been intended for. And that includes the trustees' bequest fund. That is for the building. It's not for mission and ministry. We're not looking to change that. And as we move forward to the one kind of structure, that's one of the things that we have every ability to put in writing. These are the boundaries. These are the policies. They cannot be abridged. So we can get there. And then the last thing I'll say about this is we cannot get to a new board structure without every one of you being involved in this process. Because in order to get to one board instead of the 3 boards, one board instead of the 2, is we have to make substantive changes to our bylaws. We have to make changes regarding the existence of trustees that are in our bylaws. We have to make changes to how many elders are on the session. There are multiple places throughout our bylaws, not just one decision, by the way. There will be multiple places in the bylaws, and Dana knew that. As he was putting this together, that was one of the things he wanted to make sure. He goes, I know that there's some pushback on the structure stuff. He said, in order to get there, your church has to vote on bylaws, right? And I reassured him, yes. And he's like, good, because this gives you all, congregation members, not just session, not just trustees, it gives everyone in the church control and say in the process. So when we're sitting here now and people, you're nervous or you're kind of upset about, hey, we can't do this, we won't do this, we're not going to change this. Okay, but understand you don't need to get upset because nothing can happen without your voting in it. And then it becomes the voice of the congregation as to whether we change the bylaws to put that structure in place. And what I'll say about that one board, though, is we are going to embrace that board concept. However, we need to get there. So if it turns out in some way there's resistance on creating a new board out of two boards, we're still going to create a new board within the existing structure. And certainly by January, the session as we know it. Now, again, we got to come to you all with a bylaw vote to get to 9. But if we can't get the bylaws changed, there'll be 12 people on session, but they'll have new responsibilities, a new identity, a new way of understanding how they're going to be functioning. But what it's going to do is it's going to make more transparent the dysfunction, because what it's really going to do is the only way we can get to that structure is to bring everything together. And so if it doesn't happen, then the trustees are just going to become more of an outlier, and it's going to be more apparent. And that's a good thing, by the way. It's being honest about who we are and what our structure is. And we've kind of been able to kind of get away below the scenes without really talking about some really important issues, like why can't the session be trusted? Why can't we eliminate the protective function of the trustees? And by the way, what prevents the trustees from ever engaging in behavior that there's concern that the session did engage in, such as, playing favorites or listening to a pastor's voice? I mean, if I had enough charisma, I could probably get the trustees to do something reckless. Maybe not me, but maybe someone down the road. Maybe someone down the road comes, a pastor that in his first life was an architect and a financier and has these great visions, and the trustees go, yes, we want to do it. There's nothing that prevents that from happening on that side. It just, unlike, and this is the big thing, right? There have been difficulties on the session end of the structure. We have yet to see difficulties on the trustee end, but there's no safeguards there either. And so part of this living into this new structure is looking honestly at our past and saying, okay, we can get there. We can get there. It's how do we get there, taking into consideration what are some really wise things. All of these concerns about how money's being used, how we have a healthy session that can push back at its pastor, all of those things are fantastic. We're in a position where we can take all of those concerns and those worries and lay them right out there and get them in black and white writing and really have a healthy governing body when we're all done with this. So let's just end here with the family ministry, because I'm looking at the disciple making is something that's kind of part and parcel of how I look at evangelism. You don't just conquer it's not about conquering people. It's about getting them to follow Jesus. That's a lifetime. That's a relationship. They are asking us, we're finding out more information about the stewardship program. But they are aware that this is one of the things they were able to contribute to us is we give significantly lower for our size. You take Presbyterian churches and communities like ours with a worship attendance about our size, we give significantly lower. And it's just kind of trying to figure out why that is and how maybe we can increase our giving even right now so we can do more ministry together. And then finally here, we've got, it's an interesting thing is we don't have to find young parents with children. We've got them. The main thing is getting them here on Sundays and then engaging them. And that there's programming for young parents, there's programming for young children that's more than we're doing right now. And so we're going to look at that, and we are going to hire a kids minister. We're going to look at how we can do that within our financial structure. And part of that will be commitment on your part. In order for us to do this, to have buy-in, it's going to be coming back and saying, I know what you're giving. I don't know what you're giving. I know relative to the annual budget what's pledged, right? And then just saying, hey, look, we want to do this. This is what we're working on right now is fleshing it out. Is what's going to be this will be not a salaried, this will be a wage kind of thing. So what's our price per hour? How many hours? What role do we want them to have? We want them to be doing ministry, but we also want them to be equipping people around us. And we're going to be working hand in hand. You know, I talked to Dana, Caitlin, and Robin and said, you know, in order for this position to really get a chance to thrive, we need to not go into this blindly. It can't just be me and the personnel committee going, all right, let's go find a kids minister. We really need their guidance to say, okay, this is kind of the skill set you're looking for. This is kind of the personality you're looking for. Doing everything they can to help identify with us. And in fact, you know, as we do interviewing for this position, which I'm hoping to have this position live and ready to go by August. You know, if nothing else, when we're talking about a 1/2 to 2/3 position, if we hire in August, we're looking at less than a 6-month commitment to the budget year, the fiscal year. And that makes it something that's eminently doable. We can experiment and see how we can do this. But we probably involve at least members of the committee on our interviewing process by Zoom so that they can see and hear and they can help us kind of discern. We know that if we're going to do a new ministry position, this person needs to thrive. And we need to do everything to help that happen. So this is in a 1-hour time frame, a digesting of the consultant's report. If again, you can always, you know, if you don't have my cell phone, email, you can always call the church. And if you're a member or active, or you're, you know, pretty much anybody can get it. It's not secret. You can reach me by Facebook. You have questions or comments or concerns, don't hold them in. Just let me know, or let someone know to let me know, because then I can chase you down. I want us all involved in this as a team. And I'll end with this. When I was a kid, I loved The Muppet Show. And two of my favorite characters in The Muppet Show were Waldorf and Statler, the two older gentlemen that sat in the balcony and did nothing but gripe and complain the whole time. They were the funniest part of the show. But I want to say, by way of everybody else on the show was invested in the show. Whether the bit was succeeding, you know, like Fozzie Bear always failing, Gonzo always destroying himself and maybe the set around him, Miss Piggy inevitably beating somebody up. Whatever it was, they were all invested in the show, except for Waldorf and Statler. And what I want to say is this, but they were still they were a necessary part of the whole program. The Muppet Show would not have been the Muppet Show without them. And so I want you to know that if at the end of this, you still sit there and go, I don't like what they're doing, and say, well, I'm not going to do this. You've got your place. You've got the balcony. And I don't mean literally moving to the balcony. What I'm just trying to say here is, I want you are first pres. In your eagerness, in your stubbornness, you are first pres. Most of us are going to be part of the show. We're going to be working our bits. We're going to be working our sketches, and whether they fail or they succeed, we're in it together. And if the only place you can be, but you're still with us, is in the balcony, being the voice of criticism, well, God bless you. We're going to make sure we honor that role as well. So again, be praying for first pres. That's the best thing we can all do. We all love this church. So be praying. Be praying for the session. Be praying for me as your pastor. And be praying for the consultant team. Be praying for Marion. Be praying for the lucky 100, you know, that get to be evangelized by us. So all of this being said, you know, we can do it, and we're going to do everything in our power, but we don't want to lose anybody along the way. So hang in there. Be excited if you can be. That's even better. And you know, we'll get there. We got 5 years to learn how to get there. So have a wonderful day. Thank you for spending an hour of your day watching this video, and yeah, blessings to you.